go ahead and record this to the computer. Don't say nothing stupid. We're recording, all right? You know, it's all going to be on the internet, all right? So that's funny. All right. Who here struggles with VORs? Raise your hand if you struggle with VORs. If VORs just don't make sense to you and you're just like, man, what in the heck is a VOR? Raise your hand. Okay, got one. Let's be honest. No one else knows them either. All right, it's okay. You don't have you can raise your hand and there's no judgment. All right. Yesterday's video goes into VORs in quite in depth, but in depth in a very simple way. So basically, the idea is a VOR is the radio station. Okay, it's a radio tower. You know, this is a radio station, right? Sitting right here, and it's got radio waves going all around it, right? And there's an instrument in your airplane that is designed to pick up those radio waves, because all a radio wave is an electromagnetic pulse that is specifically pulsing at a certain rate for a certain power setting and certain amps and volts and whatever, just a pulse, right? Think like an EMP. Like you've all watched like Spider-Man and stuff like that and Superman, and there's like electromagnetic pulses and that thing how the spider got caught in that little machine, you know, and like when the spider bit Peter Parker, he like, you know, freaked out, right? Like radioactive stuff. Think like pulses, okay? So you got electromagnetic pulses that leave the station. And as it leaves the station, the receiver in the airplane is designed to pick up those pulses. It is also conductive to electricity, and it receives it. As it receives those pulses, it converts those pulses into sounds, right? Now, sometimes it converts it to sounds, and you can listen to that through your audio on your navigation receiver, right? You tune in the frequency for the VOR, and when you tune that frequency in, and you go to your audio panel and you press nav 1 or nav 2 and then turn the volume up on your radio, you can hear the Morse code, right? You can hear that, which is really cool. But what it also does is it takes that signal and converts it into electric current that can make the CDI on the instrument that you have, your VOR indicator, show where you are in relation to the course that you have selected to that station. So basically, all a VOR is an antenna that you can navigate to or navigate from, and you simply tune the course that you want to fly to or from that station. And then the little instrument tells you, hey, you got to fly south to get to that course. You got to fly north to get to that course. You got to fly east, west, whatever. And when you're on that course, the little needle lines up in the middle, and you're able to fly that course to the VOR. And if the needle moves south or north, then you got to fly south or north to get back to the station. Does that make sense, Harrison? It's like that's really basically what's going on. You can people think, oh, there's to, from, and there's reverse sensing, and there's radials, and there's stuff. Don't even think about that stuff. Just think about, I want to fly to this thing, or I want to fly from this thing. Either way, the to from line is the same line, okay? It's the same line going across that thing. It's just a matter of where you are in relation to that line. But anyway, I'll get my marker out and draw that just a little bit for you. Make sure my iPad's good and charged, which it is. Got my handy dandy Apple Pencil. This episode is not sponsored by Apple. Let's see here. Share screen. Boom. Oops. Where'd he go? Here it is. Okay, this episode is not sponsored by Apple, but this episode is sponsored by the IFR Mastermind coaching community. So you guys can DM me the word link to join. We do these calls 3 days a week. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. We were doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but we changed it Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So this is what you're going to get: real life live coaching for your IFR training and for instrument instructor training. That's what you get. And a lot more of that as well. Community response, community accountability, all that kind of stuff. But anywho, I'm going to change the color. There we go. So basically, Harrison, your VOR is going to be right here. It emits the signal, right? And 360 degrees. So basically all around the station, right? And let's say I want to go to this VOR. You're like, well, why would I want to go to this VOR? Well, let me give you an example. There's an airport that's going to be right here. And you want to fly from that airport to this airport down here. So you want to fly from, you know, A to B, right? But you can't fly from A to B direct because it's, you know, it's too long. It's, you know, a few hundred miles or whatever it is. And you don't have a GPS. And you can't use pilotage and dead reckoning by just doing your wind correction and going figuring out all the landmarks and checkpoints and stuff because of the instruments. You know, big old cloud. I mean, right in between those two airports, you can't see what you're doing, right? You got to fly completely on instruments. It just, makes sense. So what you do is you figure, okay, well, what can I use as a ground-based navigation station to get from A to B? And the answer is real simple. A is close enough to, the VOR here to, pick it up with signal. The waves can reach to A, and the waves can also reach to B, right? So I'm just going to pick up the wave that goes to this VOR and fly from A to the VOR. And that course from here to here is, let's say that's like what, I don't know, 230. It's about 230 if north is up, right? 230 course, something like that, going this way. And then when we cross the VOR, which the instrument will tell you when you've crossed it, it just switches from a to, saying, hey, I'm going to the station. It will say, once you cross this line, I'll switch to a from, meaning, hey, I'm going from the station on 230 now, but I don't want to fly that, right? I just want to go to it, and then I want to turn. Once I'm at the station, I plug in the course to B. The course to B is, that looks like what, 150, we'll say. So I would tune 150 on my CDI, which is my instrument in the airplane. This little instrument right here. It said 230 up here when I was flying, and the needle was centered in the little instrument. And if I got, south or north of the line, it would show me. But once I get to right here, I switch that from 230 to 150. The needle's going to move. And what I would do is I would then turn and I would join that course. The needle will center back up, saying, hey, you're on center, you're on course now. So then I would fly that 150 course all the way to my airport. And you're like, well, how do I know when I'm at the airport? Well, if the VOR also has DME installed, distance measuring equipment, and you have that in your airplane, it will tell you how many miles you are from the VOR. And if B, is, 40 miles from the VOR, well, when your DME says 40, you're at your airport, right? And you would go from there. Of course, it's more complicated than that when it comes to like airways and the things that are legally required to be able to navigate like this. But this is just basic VOR navigation. You simply plug in the course you want to fly to a VOR and you fly it. Very simple. The actual instrument in the airplane takes a couple more bits of information to learn how to use, but you can watch yesterday's video to kind of get some information on that. Does that kind of help you, Harrison, with that?
Yeah, that does.
Okay. Is there anything that like had like a specific light bulb moment that was like, man, that really helped me right there? What was it?
Yeah, I mean, just the like VORs are located in just at airports, or they just randomly located across the
Yeah,
country.
both. Both. It's just basically this. Think about it. It's super duper simple. Humans have been trying to fly and like navigate while they're flying for, hundreds of years. Well, hundreds of years, 100 years, right?
Hmm.
100 years. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right, well, we've got all these cities across the US, I mean, Florida down here, Texas or whatever, kind of whatever, right? All these
Hmm.
cities, well, I want to fly from, here to here, right? But I can't, obviously can't just go direct when they can't see what I'm doing. So they just, in big cities, they'll put a VOR here, and they'll put one here, and they'll put one here, and here, and here, and here, and whatever, right? And then they'll make airways that connect to all these VORs, and they have this whole network of routes that you can fly across the country.
Hmm.
So
Got it.
sometimes they're just randomly in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes they're here. Like for example, BNA right here. We've got a BNA VOR, and BNA doesn't have any good airways on it anymore. They all got removed. You got Shelbyville right down here. There's an airway goes from BNA to Shelbyville, and that same airway goes to Choo Choo down in Chattanooga, right? And then you can fly
Hmm.
from there to I think LaGrange VOR, and then you can go to Atlanta and whatever, right? So you just got these VORs all across the country that you can navigate to. And sometimes what you'll have is a situation like this where there's a VOR here and there's a VOR here. And let's say there's an airway from this one to this one, and there's an airway from this one to this one. Well, this point right here is an intersection, right? It's where two airways intersect. So you've heard
Hmm.
of intersections in your instrument training, right? That's what an
Yeah.
intersection is from. That's a little triangle saying, hey, that's a point. Well, how do I navigate to that? That's easy. Whenever you're on this radial here, on this airway, you have your secondary radio plugged into this airway, right? So it's super simple. You got your first one right here, that says, hey, I am on, you know, this course right here, which is, let's say that's, you know, a 220. I'm on 220 going from that VOR. Cool. And then on your secondary radio, let's say that this course here is 300. You would have 300 plugged in right here. But you're still flying towards that 300, right? So that 300 would show over here like to the left until you're on it. But once you get to this intersection right here, that 300 centers up. And it says, hey, when both of them are centered, I have reached the intersection. Does that make like total sense, or was
Yeah, I mean, it
that
makes
talk?
sense.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
that's just the practical of what it does, right?
Right.
But the way we navigate with these is we just follow the airways that exist. So there's a one here and here and here and here, and you plan your flight based on that. It's not going to be a straight line though, right?
Hmm.
So the point here isn't make it a straight line. The point is there is a big cloud over the United States, okay? And I can't fly from New York to LA, right? Through a cloud because I can't see anything. Can't do it. So I have to figure out a way to get there. So the instrument rating and instrument flying is based on you needing to get somewhere that you otherwise would have not been able to get to. So don't worry about, oh, is it as efficient as possible? No, worry about, oh, I can get there now. It might take a little longer, but at least I can get there because I can navigate using my instruments instead of my eyeballs. And this is something
Got it.
in yesterday's video that we did, or yesterday's meeting, we talked about this as well, talking about how there's basically three phases of instrument flight. You've got your departure phase, you've got your en route phase, and you've got your arrival phase. In the departure phase, en route and arrival phase, there's three rules that you have to be able to meet for all of those. And those three rules are this. You have to be able to, well, actually, it's really just two rules, but you have to be able to navigate no matter what, but whether you're flying visually or whether you're flying IFR, it doesn't matter. You have to be able to navigate. We all understand that, know where you're at. And secondly, you have to not hit stuff. I know it sounds like way too simple, but I'm seriously, it's flying is this easy. People are like, oh, I like to overcomplicate instrument flying. I'm like, no. Can you navigate and can you not hit stuff? The answer is yes. Well, how do I know if I can do these things? That's usually the next question. Well, if you have a set of eyeballs, right, with pupils that work, right, and you can see stuff, right, then you should be able to say, oh, that is a mountain. Don't hit mountain. Okay, cool. Please avoid cumulogranite cloud. All right. So if that's what that's called, a mountain is called a cumulogranite cloud. I bet you guys never heard of that before, right? Instead of cumulonimbus, cumulogranite, you know, like rock, granite, whatever. But what? That's fine. Okay, it's whatever. I thought it was funny. So anyway, don't hit the clouds, right? Well, the next thing is, okay, well, let's say I've got that. There's also published procedures, right? So you got eyeballs. That's one of the ways you can do it. Two, you know, would be published routes, right? So let's say published. Well, what is a published route? What does that mean? Well, think about this. Back in the days when they were doing like airmail and they were doing like, think of it like the Pony Express of aviation, where they would take the biplanes, they would fly mail from coast to coast, right? What they would do is they would use like beacons, like light beacons, all across the country, like little beacon, say right here, you know, there's a beacon here, and there's a beacon here, and beacon here, and whatever. They would fly towards these beacons, right, and they'd be able to see where they're going because there's lights, right? Then they change those to simply arrows on the ground. Like literally, there'd be an arrow that looks like this, literally painted on the side of a mountain. And it says like Phoenix this way. Literally, that stuff existed. And you can see those. Um, so they would have pilots would literally fly those. Well, when the instruments, you know, became a point where it's like, well, we can't see what we're doing. How can we fly and still be able to know where we're going? Well, they figured out radio navigation, where they basically just use state radio stations to navigate. Like, well, how do they do that? Well, think about an NDB, a non-directional beacon. We don't really fly with those anymore, but an NDB might look like this. All the little dots around it, right? You guys are familiar with all that, and the little dots around the NDB, right? That NDB is basically like a small child screaming in a field. You're like, okay, what does that mean? So a small child screaming in a field is screaming at the top of their lungs, right? They're like they're lost. They want their mom and dad. They're like, ah, come help me, whatever, right? So it's so loud. The signal is so loud from that screaming kid standing out in the middle of the field, right? That everybody else in the area is like, oh man, I can hear that sound. What is that? Oh, that's terrible. It's like, ah, it's so loud, right? No, close their ears, right? So you're thinking, okay, Toby, you're being stupid. Yeah, maybe a little bit, but I think it's funny, so deal with it, all right? But going back to this, is the airplane has a receiver in it. This little box inside the airplane can pick up those signals, and it hears it, right? As it hears it, it's like, oh man, where's that sound coming from? That sound is coming from this way. And it points an arrow at the direction where that sound is coming from. This is actually how ADF works. It's all audio. So the ADF receiver in the airplane, that's ADF, it stands for Automatic Direction Finder, which we don't use anymore really very much, but we still use sometimes, points to that screaming child in the field. So, and you're able to navigate to it. Now, that's the way my instructor taught me how NDBs work. They use that analogy. I thought it was pretty funny, so I've always taught that too. But whatever. Now, you're wondering, what is an ADF? Like, what is an NDB? Well, an NDB, which is this right here, non-directional beacon, right? I'm giving this to you super simple. I'm not getting too complicated. It doesn't have like radials going from it like a VOR does. It doesn't have specific courses that you can just fly to or from. You have to just keep your arrow pointed at the NDB and then use wind correction and stuff. And it's a little bit more complicated. But simply put, the airplane points an arrow at the NDB, you fly towards it. But what were NDBs? Like, what could they be? An NDB is an AM radio station. Fun fact, if you have an ADF in your airplane and you go fly over Nashville and you plug in one of Nashville's AM radio stations, you can actually, the arrow in the airplane will point to the radio station in Nashville. And if you turn on your audio panel, you can actually listen to like the football game or whatever while it's being broadcasted in your airplane. So you can actually listen to the game or listen to your favorite music station while flying towards that station because the ADF is designed to pick up AM radio signals, which is the same signal that an NDB uses. Pretty cool, right? So think about this. This is all just super basic how radio navigation started, right? Now, I have another example in yesterday's lesson about this. I talk more about VORs. I talk about World War II and how the Germans used to do bombing raids on the British using this type of technology and other technology, all in the 30s and 40s. It's very interesting. But once you understand that navigation is simply a matter of don't hit stuff and know where you're going, it's like, okay, I can do this. So published routes, what does this have to do with anything? Well, let's say you've got a series of NDBs, you got NDBs, you got VORs, you got whatever, all across the country, whatever. And you want to fly from airport A to airport, let's say B, over here. Well, you can't fly direct because you don't have the technology to do that, right? It's instrument conditions outside. But you do have plenty of radio stations around you. So what you could do is you could fly from A to this VOR here. Then you could fly from there to this one here, then to this one here. And then from that one, you could fly on this particular course right here until you intersect whatever course this is right here. And when both needles center, you know you must be at B because you've crossed both lines. Does that make sense? Right? Like raise your hand on the camera if that makes sense, everybody. Okay, cool. Like super simple, right? Sometimes I can talk really fast and it can be really easy to be like, oh, what's going on? But that's why I like to do comprehension checks as we go. Saga, go ahead. You raised your hand? Oh, I see what you're saying. You raised your hand I see. Okay, never mind. Disregard. Yeah. So the Zoom hand was raised, not the actual physical hand. And I was like, oh, it must have a question or something. So I was like, hey, go ahead. But no, it's actually just raising his hand because he didn't have his camera on. All right, cool. So anyway, that's the way we can navigate. But let's say that there's a bunch of terrain in this area. There's like there's towers over here, and maybe there's a mountain like there's a mountain right here, say, right? And that mountain is really tall. That mountain's, 6,000 feet tall or something like that. Well, if we're flying a little airplane and we can't get as high as 6,000 feet or 8,000 feet, maybe we're flying a 150 or maybe it's a really high density altitude day or whatever. It doesn't matter. Just go with the example. And we can't go this route that I've highlighted right here. We can't go this route at a low altitude because of the problems with the terrain and obstacles. So what do we do? Well, a couple options. If we go back to the FBO at the airport and we talk to Billy Bob over here, who's, in the FBO, Billy Bob's sitting out here, at the picnic table, with with his cigar and, his headset on, whatever. I don't know. He's just being Billy Bob. All right. And you say, hey, Billy, I want to go over here to this airport, but darn it, I don't know if I'm going to be able to clear that mountain. What do you think? And Billy Bob, he scribbles out on a napkin. He scribbles out some instructions that says, all right, but when you get to this point right here, you need to be at 8,000 feet because that mountain here is at 6,000 feet. So if you're at 8,000 feet between here and here, you are not going to hit that mountain. Thanks, Billy. Appreciate that. Right. Then you say, okay, what about the next part? He said, okay, this radio station right here, it actually causes interference with this station and this station right here. So what I've determined, Billy Bob says, is that when you get halfway between this VOR and this VOR, I need you to switch the frequencies that you're using. So don't use this VOR all the way because it won't work. The signal cuts out past the station. So what you can do is you can switch it over right there. So when you get halfway between the two, switch your frequencies. Now, all of you instrument rated pilots or guys who have passed your written test will know that this is called a changeover point. These actually exist in the FAA. They said, hey, change over from this VOR to this VOR on the airway because of whatever reason. Usually it's reception. So Billy Bob says, hey, use a changeover point. So COP. Cool. And then Billy says, after that, you should be clear to go, but you're going to need to fly the specific course right here. It's a specific course of 003 degrees. You fly 003 degrees for about 11 miles or whatever it is. And then if you don't have a distance in your airplane, then you can use the ABC VOR over here. When it says 280, you'll cross your airport and you'll be good. And you should be good on altitude on this leg at 3,000. But because the mountain is here at 6,000, I need you to be at least at 8,000. And then once you get past all that, you can be on this leg here at 4,000. Those are your minimum altitudes. So all this was given to you by the old guy sitting at the FBO who wrote on a napkin some instructions. Well, this old guy's the FAA, okay? The FAA was like, hey, so we do the work so you don't have to. Here is a route that will get you there safely. And those are called airways and published routes. All right. But back in the 40s and 30s, the FAA didn't exist. It was a Civil Aeronautics Administration Association, something like that. The CAA is what existed. And the rules were much looser. They didn't really have much to them. But that's what it all started out with. And think about airmail. They're trying to fly from, A to B. Well, for example, you guys know Jeppesen, right? Jeppesen charts, right? So Jeppesen was, I forgot the guy's his first name, but Mr. Jeppesen was an airmail pilot, I think is what he was. And he would fly across the country delivering mail. But when he did that, he wanted to create a database of safe routes that pilots could fly to get from A to B because there was a lot of terrain and whatever in the area. So he would take a napkin or a piece of paper or his notebook and he would draw out on those pieces of paper the routes that got him from A to B safely and the things that he learned on those routes. And people loved his drawings so much that they started asking him to make them for all the routes. So he would fly all the routes and draw them and then fine tune them. And then he had this whole stack of charts that he made that got people safely from A to B. So that's how Jeppesen charts actually started. A guy named Jeppesen flying in the the 20s, 30s, and 40s or whatever. I guess they're 10s, I'm not sure. Writing down on a napkin, like Billy Bob over here, the instructions for how to get from A to B safely. Very interesting. Who's heard that story before? Yeah. See, it's like if you just knew a little bit about aviation history, it's like, oh shoot, this stuff makes sense. VORs aren't hard, charts aren't hard. It's just Billy Bob writing down a list of things saying, hey, if you do this, you're not gonna die. Probably. So that's basically the gist there. Um, anyway, I'm going to move on here. But the idea is that if you were to fly those published procedures, you'll be able to navigate. Oh, and also you won't be able to hit stuff either because it tells you how to not hit stuff. Easy. And then of course, the last example, I always say, third would be, ATC. ATC can point you in the right direction if they have radar, and they can also help you not hit stuff because of their minimum vectoring altitudes and so forth. Um, and that's that. Now, of course, if you use your eyeballs to navigate, that puts the onus is on you. So that's pilot responsibility, right? Pilot responsibility. So if, that's why air traffic control might say in November 7880 Golf, or whatever your tail number was, or 80 Golf, are you able to maintain your own terrain and obstruction clearance from your present altitude to 2,700? And if you can, you would say, 80 Golf, affirmative, I'm able to maintain my own terrain obstruction clearance from my present altitude to, 3,000 or whatever it is. And that takes responsibility off of air traffic control if you hit something and puts it on you because they can't give you any vectors down that low. But they're saying, hey, if you're cool with it and you think you're not going to hit anything, it's on you, but you're clear to climb or clear to go on whatever you want to do now. And it's like, okay, cool. Because if you can look outside and see that giant tower just south of Tune and not hit it, they'll let you do what you want, right? Um, but anyway, does that make sense, guys? Okay, so this is super, super basic stuff. Um, and we'll get into some more complex subjects here and be a little bit more practical. All right, the next thing that I want to discuss here is a couple tricks on how to get your clearance in the airplane. So a lot of us use ForeFlight, right? And we go down to our scratch pads, and we write down, okay, well, as you can see, my last ATIS I collected was at Tune, right? So, I go to new, ATIS, whatever. I hit new, craft, and I'll draw, I'm clear, clear to BNA, via whatever, the John Tune 1 departure, whatever, right? You do your thing. So draw it all out. But I don't like using the scratch pads in ForeFlight because I find that it's nicer if I can have my maps open and actually, look at my charts and do what I'm trying to do. So instead, if you take your finger on your iPad and you swipe it from the bottom corner of your screen like this, is it going to do it? Do I have it turned on? Let me try it again. Why is it not doing it? Is the setting changed? Okay, there's a setting that you go into your iPad. I'm gonna have to pull it up, but basically you can actually swipe, kind of like how you swipe in the top corner of your iPad to pull that screen up, right? On the bottom side of your iPad, you swipe the corner up and it actually makes the notes, like the Notes app, open, which is really cool. I'm gonna close the Notes app and see if that fixes it. That's not fixing it. Let's go to settings and see if we can figure that out. There's a guy named Seth Lake on Instagram. You guys probably all follow him, VSL Aviation. He has a great video on how to use this. So VSL Aviation on Instagram shows exactly what you can do to make this happen. I believe it's under, let's see, multitasking and gestures. Swipe finger from corner, bottom corner. Quick note, there we go. That's what it was. So swipe up and notes pops up on your screen, just like that. So that's what I do to get my clearances. Delete that. See, my last clearance, I flew from this airport to via John Tune 1 ARG. So I was flying the jet that day. So I just draw what I want to draw. I can hit clear and just go from there. So I'm going to hit, let's see, delete. You can swipe for you swipe one way or the other for a new one. You can delete them all or whatever, right? So that's what you do. You take the bottom of your iPad, swipe up, and your notes come up. And you can get your clearance, swipe it back down, And then if you want to pull it back up to read off what ATC said, swipe it up again. So that's how I recommend getting your clearance on your iPad, is just to do it that way, because that way you still have ForeFlight up over here and you can still look at it while your clearance is all written down. Pretty cool pro tip. Has anybody else used that feature before? No. So that's what I recommend doing. And the way you set it up is you go to settings. Oops, let me get rid of that. Go to settings, multitasking and gestures, which is right down here under general. And then you go to the very bottom where it says swipe finger from corner, turn it on, and then say the bottom right corner, quick note. That's what I do. So that's my recommendation for that. All right, cool. The next thing that I wanted to write down for you guys is a quick example of actually how I draw my clearances on my iPad. That way you guys can have a better idea of shorthand, because too many people like to draw out the entire life story that air traffic control gives them on their craft. I find it to be rather unnecessary. So for purposes of conversation, I'm going to use the scratch pads just because it has craft written out on it. So let's say I'm cleared to an airport. I say cleared to whatever airport. I'll write down the three-letter airport code. So, cleared to, the Mountain Home Airport, Bravo, Papa Kilo. Then this is usually from John Tune. So John Tune will say, cleared to Bravo, Papa Kilo via the John Tune 1 departure, then as filed, or John Tune 1 departure, this point, then as filed, or whatever. So I'm not going to write down John Tune 1. I'm just going to write down via John Tune 1. Now, I know it's not an airway. I just know from the context of the clearance. Like, I know this is the John Tune 1 departure. You could write down John Tune 1 if you wanted to, and that would be the SID. However, because the whole purpose of the scratch pad is so I can read it back, right? As long as I can read this back and I know what I'm trying to read back to the controller, it doesn't matter what I write down. I mean, I've received this clearance so many times. Half the time, I don't even write down from a craft. All I write down is my altitude if it's different and my squawk code, because I've gotten this clearance so many times and it has never changed. I'm like, you know what? I'm probably getting John Tune 1 and this and that and that. And if they change one thing, I'll have my pencil out here ready to scribble if they change it. So I always write it down like this. Say, clear to Bravo Papa Kilo Airport by the John Tune 1 departure as filed. Then I would write down the altitude. They usually say, climb maintain 3,000, expect flight level 32010 minutes after departure. So maintain 3,000, expect flight level 32010 minutes after departure. I just write those numbers down. We know what those numbers mean. If you wanted to, you could put slashes between them. I don't care. But I don't write down. I never write down maintain 3,000, expect flight level 320. It's too much writing, too much stuff. You got to get this down pretty quickly. So I just write down maintain 3,000, then a slash, oh, is it going to work? 320 and 10 or something like that. You can do that if you want to. Although, again, my favorite method is this. Then departure frequency, right? I usually write that down in its entirety because 119.35, okay, that's easy to write down. However, sometimes I'll just write down departure is 1935. Cool. And then squawk, 4362, whatever. Now, let's say this was from an untowered airport, like Dixon, the airport I fly out of, and I got this clearance from Memphis Center. Of course, I wouldn't be John Tune 1 departure. It'd be something different because, I'm not flying out of tune at this point. But let's say this is an untowered airport. After that, they're going to give me a clearance void time because they're going to release me for departure. It's not towered. You guys will learn about that if you haven't already. But they'll say, all right, squawk 4362. Then they're going to say clearance void. Clearance void if not off by 1015 Zulu. Then they're going to say, if not off by 1015, advise Memphis Center of intentions no later than 1020. Time now 0948 and a quarter or whatever, right? They'll say 0948 and a half, and a quarter, and 1/2, whatever. They tell you how many seconds it is. I usually don't read that part back because by the time I finish talking, it will be, 0949 or whatever. So it doesn't really matter. So that's what I write down. People like to overcomplicate it. They're always going to give you three numbers. They're going to give you your void time. They're going to give you the call me back by time if you don't get off the ground, and they're going to give you the time now. So just write those three numbers down. So this whole clearance would be, citation 1234, cleared to Bravo Papa Kilo, John Tune 1 departure as filed. Maintain 3000, expect flight level 320, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 119.35, squawk 4362. Clearance void if let off by 1015. If not off by 1015, advise ATC of attentions no later than 1020. Time now 0948 and a quarter. And then you would read that back. Does that make sense? Q. Is it Lucia or Lucia? You need to unmute your microphone.
Lucy, simply.
Lucy. Okay, cool. Wonderful. Okay, cool. So that's just an example of how I would do that. And then let's go here to the next topic that I was asked to talk about today. I was asked to talk about terminal arrival areas as well as WAS and missed approach things. So we're going to bust through those real quick. And then once we get done with that, I'll have some time for some Q&A, and you guys can ask your specific questions that we can kind of go into that. And just so you know, when we do the mastermind calls for the IFR Pilot Mastermind, most of the call is answering questions. But on the trial runs, what we're doing is I'm answering all the questions that all the people in the mastermind have asked on the forum. So they ask the questions, I'm answering those questions here for them, and then we do Q&A afterwards. That way we can save some time. Anyway, so the next question that I was asked on here was how to stay ahead of the airplane. And that's a pretty common question. So how many of you have wondered, how do you stay ahead of the airplane in IFR? I'll take that as all of you, even though no one raised their hands. That's okay. So how to stay ahead of the airplane. I wrote that down. How to stay ahead. This is ahead. So it's ahead. I thought it was funny, whatever. All right. So how to stay ahead of the airplane. Lots of things that you can do to do this. The biggest thing comes down to this. I'm going to ask you guys a question. I want you to unmute your microphones, and I want you all to tell me what you think about this. Which is more important? Pre-flight planning? No, DHT. Pre-flight planning or aeronautical decision making? What do you think about this question? Which is more important, pre-flight planning or aeronautical decision making? Tell me what you think.
In my logic, you cannot separate it because before knowing where you are, what to expect en route, and having that pre-flight, then you cannot do good decisions en route.
That is exactly right. That is completely true. So they are neither are more important than the other. However, they do have their prospective places in line. So for example, many people would tell me that, well, of course, decision making is most important. Well, it's all built into decision making. A good decision will include intense planning, of course, right? But some people say, oh, well, I'm just going to loosely plan my flight and just do a little bit of planning. And then when I'm in the air, I'll just make a bunch of decisions and figure it out as I go. And they try to play it by ear instead of actually having a plan and sticking to it. So the answer to this question, and this is how people stay ahead of the airplane, or one of the ways anyway, is plan the flight so thoroughly, plan so much that you won't have to make any decisions or as many decisions in the air. Plan to avoid airborne decisions. Now, you're going to have to make decisions while you fly. It's always going to be the case. You're never going to have a situation where you don't have to make a decision. However, plan things out as if you know exactly how the entire flight is going to happen. Plan big time. Now, be open to using good aeronautical decision making in flight if the plan that you made does not come to pass like you expected that it would. So I've found that if I plan my flight as if I already know what instrument approach procedures I'm going to fly, as if I know what standard instrument departure I'm going to fly or the standard terminal arrival route. Of course, most of you guys in instrument training probably aren't flying mini SIDs or stars because those are typically for bigger airports and jets and usually are flying those. But there are still SIDs and stars that you can fly in a single or multi-engine piston airplane. But typically, we don't do very many of them in training. But when I'm flying the jet around, I usually have an idea. I'm probably going to be flying, these procedures on this flight. I'm probably going to be taking off of this runway, probably going to be landing on this other runway. I'm probably going to have a certain altitude or maybe a path for weather, right? My weather route, because there's a storm between A and B, and I've got to deviate around the storm or something, right? I probably already have an idea of what I'm going to do, and I fly the flight as if that's going to happen. But as I'm on the flight, something's going to happen right here, right? And my plan is going to change. So at that point, I say, okay, it is now time for me to use some good decision making and figure out what can I do here to, be safe, right? So that's just a very basic example of good planning followed by decisions in the plane. So it's all encompassed in decision making, but planning is the first thing that you need to master. Plan things out so thoroughly that will help you stay ahead of the airplane. The next way to stay ahead of the airplane is simply to slow down. I mean that from the standpoint of, let's say you're flying along at 2,500 RPM in your Archer, your Warrior, your Skyhawk, or whatever you're flying. And that 2,500 RPM, gives you, let's say, 120 knots. That's totally fine. You could fly that. But especially if it's turbulent and it's really bumpy, it can be easy to get distracted or kind of feel like, oh man, this is happening all so fast. The airplane shaking, it's going, and it's like, oh man, this is really stressful. I tell my students, there is nothing wrong with pulling the throttle back to 2,100 RPM, slowing down to 90 knots, and just slowing it all down. There's less turbulence. There's less confusion. Things are happening slower, and you're able to think much more clearly. Another way that you can stay ahead of the airplane is to brief your checklists before you need to use them. So for example, let's talk about the before landing checklist. The before landing checklist. Oftentimes, people will say that you should do your before landing checklist when you are in the pattern. So that might look like this. The runway is right here, and you're out here coming into the airport. And you're flying along and you're entering the 45, and now you're on downwind, and now you're coming around on final and you're going to land. Most people think that you're supposed to pull out your checklist in the pattern and be reading it between here and here. And that's stupid. That's dumb. You shouldn't be looking at your piece of paper here. You should not. No paper. Don't do that. Instead, what I want you to do is I want you to brief the checklist out here when you're, 10 miles from the airport. Go ahead and brief your before landing checklist and know what is on the procedure. Just know what's coming next. By knowing what's coming next, you'll be able to then complete a flow when you enter the pattern. And the flow is simply all the items in the checklist from memory. This is called the brief, then flow method. Does that make sense? That's a great way to stay ahead of the airplane, is to brief your checklists way out here so that when you are busy, all you have to do is flow. Because really, there's 3 phases of flight, or three aspects of flight. There's going to be when you're busy. There's going to be when you expect to be busy. Expect busy. And then there's times when you are not busy. See, when you're not busy, you can read the checklist. And then you can do what it says because you're not busy. You can pull it out and make sure I did all these things. Cool. But the alternative, oh, we'll see you, Saul. The alternative is, let's say that you are not busy yet, but you think you're going to be busy. So the example will be up here. You're not busy right now, but you're about to be very busy, right? What you can do is you can brief the checklist, and then after you brief it, when it's time to complete the items, do a flow. Pretty simple. The last point is, let's say we are really busy and we are too busy to be doing things right now or to be reading anything. When you're busy, you do a flow first, and then after you complete the flow, you then verify on paper what you were supposed to do to make sure you didn't miss anything after you're busy. So when you're not busy, then you can go back and verify. Does that make sense? Yeah. So now, do you know, Lucy, what a flow is?
It's actual execution of the task of the checklist.
Yes. I'll give you an example of what it looks like. Let's say that this is the instrument panel of an airplane.
I fly
We've got-
Garmin.
That's fine. Let's see here. Let's just say that something like that, right? You got your airspeed tapes, you got your heading, whatever, right? You got your engine gauges over here, your RPM, your oil pressure, all that type of stuff. Down here, you'll have your throttle, you'll have your propeller knob, you'll have your mixture. Maybe you have a landing gear handle. If you have landing gear extensions, like retractable landing gear, you might have your master switch, over here, your avionics switch, your standby batteries, all those things, right? Your fuel selector, Whatever.
Well, very good drawing.
What was that?
I said very good drawing.
Yeah, well, I may have flown a couple airplanes in my life, you know. So anyway, all that's happening there. A flow would be an example of, okay, well, we know that before landing, what do we do in a Skyhawk, right? Are you flying a Skyhawk?
I fly plenty of planes, not only Skyhawk.
Okay, but you do,
I'll
but
be, yeah. I
what are
know
some of the
Sky,
planes? Sorry, what are some of the planes
uh,
that you fly?
Skyhawk, also Warrior, Archer, and Diamond 2042, and I'll be doing my instrument rating exam on Tekna Mentor with G3X Garmin.
Oh, the
Well,
G3X is one.
yeah,
Yeah, the
I
G3X is
mean,
very good at. I'm familiar with all those.
I'm not. I will have to get familiar with that, but yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of training on G3X as well. But anyway, in fact, one of the things I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking videos when I fly in the G3X. I'm going to be giving training videos, and they're all going to be uploaded to the Mastermind community so people can watch those. But anyway, so an example of a flow could be something like this. Before landing checklist, we always do GUMPs, right? Gas, undercarriage, mixture, you know, prop, pumps, straps, flaps, seat belts, whatever. It's just an acronym that we always use. And you can have your own checklist if you want to, but this is one that we typically do. So a flow
Which
would be me saying, okay, gas is on the fullest tank.
uh, uh, what was it?
Well, you can do Google it
So,
too. If you Google Gumps and then write down airplane or something, it will all pull up. It's a very common uh, flow procedure. But we would start with gas, then we would go from gas to undercarriage. So it kind of looks like this. Let me do this. I'm going to highlight it. We
I mean,
start
it
here.
reminds me of the emergencies when you do things, you know, like when you know the flow. Like, yeah, I usually do some L, or let's say in Vario or something. You do this kind
Exactly.
of
Like you
like,
start here and you go here and then you go
yeah,
here and
yeah,
then
yeah.
you go here, right? That's a flow. That's all a flow is. So anyway, and they're similar for some airplanes and dissimilar for others. But anyway, so that's kind of how you would do that. And these are some great ways to stay ahead of the airplane. I always tell people that if they're flying on a trip and they're en route, let's say, clear out my annotations. Oops. Clear. Done. Uh, what area are you flying? Like, where are you in the country?
I used to fly a lot in Iceland. Now I'll be doing the instrument rating in Czech Republic,
Okay, so
Central
you're
Europe.
way over here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have any charts for Czech Republic, so I'll have to go to the US.
Fine, it's fine.
But
Like I follow all the regions.
okay, so let's say that we're flying from Knoxville to Asheville, you know, and there's a bunch of routes that we could fly. You know, we could fly from here to here and we could do whatever. You know, being ahead of the airplane might be knowing that we're probably going to fly, you know, this approach coming in this direction. So by the time we're over this VOR, we already have the GPS set up. We've already got the ATIS, you know, we already have briefed the approach, you know, etc. We just get all of our stuff done well before we need to. See, most people, they'll be talking to approach, and by the time they talk to approach control, approach starts giving them vectors and doing all these things with them, but the pilot was never ready. They weren't prepared. So they should brief these things beforehand to make them prepared. And we go from there. So those are just some examples of ways to stay ahead of the airplane and go from there. But anyway, we are just about out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any questions anybody has. Tsang, Hakeem, Gerardo, you guys as well can raise your hand and we can ask some questions and go into anything specific that you guys and Lucy have questions about.
Frankly, I might not have any particular questions at this moment. This is my first time joining the webinar or your channel. I just came across you on Instagram recently. Your very impressive quick readings of the charts were kind of helpful to me, or at least I know where to aim for. And yeah, I just started. I had my first gym session, so it's quite overwhelming. But at this moment, I think I have everything. I know what I'm doing. Practice with practice some part. I guess it's for me. How later.
Okay. I only heard part of that because it was a little bit broken, but I heard the part about how you said you enjoyed reading the approaches and how the briefings were quick and efficient and those types of things. So that's good. I'm going to record. I have this meeting recorded and I'm going to upload it to YouTube and put a link on Instagram. I have the other meeting from yesterday as well. We do these 3 times a week, and today's and yesterday's were free. Just anybody can come and see what's going on. But we have these as part of our instrument mastermind community. The idea is we have instrument pilots from all over the world and instrument instructors, master instructors, ATP pilots, even pilot examiners. We've got in this community, we've got one pilot examiner, excuse me, one pilot examiner, 2 master instructors, 2 air traffic controllers, multiple ATP pilots. We have military instructors as well. And one of our military instructors has experience in the entire world of aviation, all over. He's flown to Russia, he's flown to China, he's flown all across Europe, the Czech, Greenland, Iceland, Germany, Austria, Romania, Hungary, Spain, everywhere, Africa. So he is very well versed in those things. So he would be able to give even more insight into the things that you may be dealing with that I am not as familiar with, because I only fly in the US and I could fly in Canada, but I don't really. I've never flown to Canada. But that's typically where I'm flying. So to get into all of this stuff, there's a link in my bio. You can click on that link and it takes you to the community. It is a paid community, so we dedicate to really helping people solve their problems and instruments. The whole point is we're trying to create, not we're trying, we have created, we've created this environment where people can come and be nurtured through their instrument training as well as their instructor training, because that's our focus is instrument pilots and instructors. That's what we do. I have an entirely separate business that I actually do where I help flight instructors not only become flight instructors, but build an entire business around it so that they're able to be flight instructors for a living and make that their career to make more great pilots. Because too many instructors go off to the airlines and they never come back, you know? So we're trying to make that for everybody. But I appreciate you coming on, and you're more than welcome to click the link on my bio on Instagram and become a part of the community. So we do these 3 times a week. So it's good stuff.
Yeah. I'd not be able to join like credit dollars. Yeah, so definitely have a look on the link. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, actually, I will join.
Sure. Yeah, and you can join anytime. You can join anytime in the meetings. There's no specific deal. And we spread the times out as well. So we'll be doing Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday usually, but we may add more as more instructors become available for it. But I have to find people that are willing to do it because it's not free, right? People have to pay these guys to do these things. But the more people that come in makes it more affordable.
Yeah. So do you think you'll be also like focusing on going through the Garmin stuff and real in-flight navigation? How to properly like line up with the bars and to deal with this some sort of
Yeah, I'm going
uh yeah.
I'm going to try to do some of that. I actually have an FAA approved flight simulator with G1000 that I could hook up to Zoom and do screen share with that. However, it's very difficult right now to hook all of that together for Zoom, but I do have videos that I can make on that. So that's one of the things about the mastermind community is you can go in and request, we need a training series on this subject with this avionics package and G1000 and then Garmin 430, 530 and 750, 650. We're able to go in there and actually make those videos. And the videos are very authentic. It's not highly edited. It's just, me or somebody else in the simulator explaining and teaching through whatever it is that you've requested. So they usually, because they're not very well edited, they just are raw videos. We can push them out pretty quickly and people get their questions answered easily.
Okay. Tony, yeah.
Hakeem, do you have any questions?
None at this time. I don't have any questions.
Okay, what are your takeaways, Hakeem? Takeaways, things you learned from this lesson.
Um, Takeaways from this. I wasn't these stuff I kind of know already that you was gonna point over. So it's like I'm looking for like more in-depth stuff. You know what I mean? So, but um, learn a little bit more about the VOR, but otherwise I kind of know those little basic navigations stuff already. So I was kind of looking for more in-depth stuff. Yeah.
Sure, sure. What do you want to see next time?
A couple of DME arcs, stuff like that. DME arcs. We could do a pre-flight with the briefings. Um,
Okay,
Basically that.
DME arcs. I've
Yeah, DME
got
arcs.
dozens of videos. I have dozens of videos that I've made on DME arcs, and they're all on YouTube or in the mastermind. So there's access to all those things. In fact, the very first group call that we did for this was on DME arcs. Thoroughly, very thorough. So those are actually in the course on the mastermind community. I think I have one of the videos available on YouTube. I think if you go to my YouTube channel, I think it's there. Let me look and see. Here you go. Uh, let's see. Here we go. Here is one of the videos on DME arcs. This is actually the coaching session from 3 days ago, 4 days ago. It's an hour-long video, but it's all about that. So there's also another video here that I made on that right here.
Oh, my mic was muted. And I'd like you to go over like stars, you know, like explain them, you know, stars. That would be nice.
Cool. Are you a mastermind member?
No.
Okay. So join the mastermind, put all these things in there, and it's all added to the list what we talked about.
All right.
Today's was me going over questions that people had on the mastermind, and I went through some of those. But some of the calls, when it's not as big of a crowd, we kind of go into the individual things and say, okay, we want to talk about these things here and here and here. But the best way and the easiest way for you to get your questions answered is to talk about them in the mastermind community. So that's how it all gets done. And everything's recorded too, the whole courses and everything.
Okay.
Anyway, very cool. Anything else, Hakeem?
When are you gonna have another video like this? You say 3 times a week, right?
3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday.
Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Okay.
Gerardo, can you hear me?
Yep, I'm in here.
Any takeaways, questions, comments, or concerns?
I was just wondering how much do I have to pay to become a member?
You're asking how much to become a member of the mastermind?
Yeah,
Right now, it's $39 a month.
okay, got you. With regard to the brief and flow topic that you were talking earlier on, I've got what I got was that I'm supposed to read 10 miles prior to getting my destination. Just read, for example, the plates or that we're gonna perform, right?
Say that one more time, please.
That we're supposed to just read 10 miles, for example, before getting to our destination. Just read the plates, the approach and the stars or the instrument approach procedure that we are going to perform. Just read, but not the checklist itself.
Yeah, brief everything that you can brief before you get to the airport, because once you're in the pattern or once you're on the instrument approach procedure, you don't have time. See you, Lucy. I appreciate it. But yeah, Gerardo, to answer your question, you want to brief those things as early as possible. That way, you don't have to think about them later so much. You don't want to have to pull things out at the last second. For example, I was flying the Citation the other day, and we're flying along at 200, 300 knots, right? And coming in down from altitude. And while we're coming down, what happens is the air traffic controller says, "Hey, the runway's changed at the airport. I need you to go to a different runway." And I had already briefed the approach for runway 20, but now I had to fly the approach for runway 02 or vice versa, something like that. And I was flying the jet, but I had autopilot on, so I kept the autopilot on. I went to the GPS and quickly plugged in the new procedure, and the air traffic controller gave me a heading. So I turned off the navigation on the GPS or on the autopilot for navigation, and I switched to heading mode, and I turned the airplane to the heading they gave me. And while I was on that heading and the airplane is descending, I went to my iPad and I pulled up that procedure, and I made sure that it was the correct procedure. I made sure that the correct frequency was in. I had enough runway length. I knew the misapproach procedure. I checked the notes, and I just made sure that the waypoints on the chart matched the waypoints in the GPS. And I just had it all prepared, as soon as I knew that I was going to do it, because I didn't want to wait any longer. Now, sometimes you'll have to do it quickly like I did that time because air traffic control gives you changes. But the air traffic controller giving me a new heading helped me have time to be able to complete the rest of my briefings.
All right. And at what time do you actually do you grab the checklist, the before landing checklist, like on long final or short final?
No. So this is a great question. This is a good question. So are you flying single pilot or are you flying with someone else?
Well, I'm on my training to become a flight instructor
Okay,
here
so
down in Peru.
Are you an instrument pilot right now, or are you learning for instruments?
No, I have the training, the rating.
Okay, so you're asking about as an instrument instructor.
Um, yeah,
Okay,
or just in real life. I mean, if you were flying as a single, if you were flying alone or you were with another pilot,
okay,
both cases.
great question. Here's what I do when I'm flying the jet. We'll say single pilot.
Okay.
So I pull out the before landing checklist and I read it and I make sure that I have everything on it briefed and ready to go, or done beforehand before I join final. So, for example, I make sure that the before landing checklist is completely done by the time I cross the final approach fix. So it's completely done before the final approach fix. After the final approach fix, I don't do anything except for land the airplane.
I got you. So yeah,
So
before the final approach fix, you are supposed to be, you're supposed to already grab the checklist and put the flaps and just check that everything that your plane is set for landing.
yes, yes, I'll say this. It's not about grabbing the checklist. It's about completing the items. So you don't have to grab the piece of paper to complete the items. What you need to do is make sure this is done, this is done, this has been taken care of. Make sure it's all been done. And then
By memory.
pull the checklist out afterwards and quickly make sure you did it all.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Or pull the checklist out before, read it off, make sure you know what to do, so that when it comes time to do it, you know what you have to do and you do it. But my preferred method is to do everything first and then pull it out directly after, hold it up on the panel and quickly check, okay, that's good, and then put it back down.
Yeah, got you. And you're supposed to do all of that before your final approach fix.
Yes.
And that is on both cases. You are a single engine pilot if you are flying alone, or you are with another pilot, right?
Both cases, I would say both. However, when I'm flying with another pilot, what I will do is if I am the pilot flying, the pilot monitoring, the co-pilot will pull the checklist out, and I will tell the pilot monitoring, I will say, 200 knots gear down, or no, 200 knots gear down, 200 knots flaps approach before landing checklist, and he'll select flaps approach, and then he'll pull up the before landing checklist, and he'll read it. And he'll say, you know, landing gear. And I'll say, you know, down or whatever, right? And I'll select it down. Then he'll say, you know, landing lights, and I'll say on. And he'll say igniters, and I'll say on. And he'll say boost pumps, and I'll say normal, and whatever. And I'll do those things. Him reading me the checklist tells me what to do, so I can just do it from what he says. That way, I don't have to necessarily do it from memory initially.
Mhm.
I can just hear it as he's saying it. However, let's say I need to get some of these things done earlier because they just need to be done. See, the checklist is not a do list. It's simply a piece of paper that tells you, don't forget to do these things before you land. So because I'm a pilot and I know how the airplane flies, I will go through and just flick switches, do what I have to do to set the airplane up for success. And then after that, I'll say before landing checklist. He'll read it to me and I'll make sure I did everything. But if I'm flying by myself, I need to make sure that it's all done earlier because I don't have as much time to make errors because I only have myself. I don't have a co-pilot.
Thank you for clarifying this to me.
No problem. No problem.
Appreciate it.
No problem at all. Any other questions from anybody? Gerardo or Hakeem?
No questions. How much do you charge for a one-on-one, basically?
For one-on-ones, there's actually
What's
a
your rate?
link. I forget what it is, honestly. Let me find it. I don't do many one-on-ones because it takes so much time and it's expensive, but let me find it. I don't charge hourly, I charge for results. So basically, whenever you work with me, we say, okay, what is your problem? And we sit down, we figure it out, and I charge you a flat fee, and then we do whatever we have to do to fix that problem. I think it's 300, I think is what it is. Let me find
300.
it. Yeah, it's yeah, it's 300. I can send you the link to it if you decide you want to do that. Who that is. But the best place to do it is probably in group calls. That way everyone can benefit and it's significantly cheaper. But if you do need a one-on-one, I have it there. All right, wonderful. Okay, I have got to go. It is 30 minutes late. I have got so many things I need to do now, but it was great to have you guys on the call today. And I'm going to go ahead and head out, but looking forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday, if not earlier.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
All right, no
Thank you,
problem. We'll see you
Tommy.
guys later.
Really appreciate this. Thank you. Have a good
No
one.
problem. You too.